As we spend ever increasing amounts of money on our saddles, fitters need to be able to justify what they offer. And this is what we're aiming to get to the bottom of in this summit. We are thrilled to welcome leading saddle design innovators, Maria Hallring from Sweden, ErgoX2 Saddles, and Bradley Whale from Ipotane Saddles in the UK. They represent opposite ends of the saddle design spectrum, although you will see tonight that they have many similarities in their designs. Maria is the almost traditional rigid saddles, but with a very important difference as the importance of pelvic floor conformation and how the rider can be seated in the most posturally effective way. And Bradley Whale, whose innovation has evolved to form a from scratch, non-traditional, two-part saddle design that is flexible for the horse and rigid for the rider. Tonight, we will take a deep dive into why they have selected these two very different saddle designs to bring to the market. I'm almost finished. From my perspective, as halfway through a PhD study pathway, focusing on rider pain and what a rider needs from a saddle to help protect their musculoskeletal health, namely postural stability for synchrony with the horse's movement, I've always advocated that saddles should be prescribed and not just merely fitted, especially for the precision rider. Any questions I pose will be focused on how saddles can protect the rider's musculoskeletal health. And of course, I will be mediating between our presenters and the audience to relay your questions. So don't be shy, do ask. Maria and Bradley are seasoned summit guests who can hold their own across an extensive range of discussion points. So don't worry about upsetting them, just ask. We will start with Maria. And Maria, if you'd like to give us the skinny on your saddle designed background, you have about a minute to explain your background before you present your perspectives.
Okay. My background is really about riding a lot of horses and being very, very interested in how to make them function better, behave better, and perform better. And basically, I was just lucky because I was very short and I was quite fit. So I thought I was a good rider. I probably wasn't as good as I thought. And as I started to look into saddles, I started to realize that the saddle had a lot to do with both making the horse comfortable and then also with making the rider sit in a way that could actually make the rider effective and not bounce around, be tossed backwards or sway to the sides. So in the last 10 years, I've been discovering how to help riders to basically find their own conformation and match it to the horse's conformation. And that's what I've been up to.
Excellent. I think we'll have just a bit from Bradley now. It's a good time to do that before he presents, although we'll start with Maria first. Bradley?
Oh gosh, right. So I'm the weirdo in the group. Basically, I was an ex-rider, and then I grew, becoming 6'5" and 120 kilos. So I was more suited for rowing rather than horse riding. So I ended up competing in rowing at international level. So I understand the mentality and the approach of a high performance individual. I also then trained as an osteopath, both in humans and equine. And then in the equine fraternity, I kind of ended up writing a couple of books on compensatory biomechanics between horses and riders. That was my first book. Second book was on nutrition and physiology. And then the third book is on psychology, sociology, and spirituality. The difficulty is in all of that, doing all that research, all of the kind of experience driven, I realized that there was a fundamental issue with saddles and saddlery. So I then started to poke and prod the saddlery industry, and started to ask loads of questions, mainly why, and ended up kind of basically looking at the industry and going, well, why aren't we making what is called a hybrid saddle, such as what we're going to talk about today? where it's an amalgamation of two opposing theories. And that's what we did, basically come into the industry and start breaking a load of rules. And hopefully you'll start kind of seeing where I'm coming from in terms of breaking rules and lots and lots of questions. Trust me, you're not going to offend me if you start firing questions at me, because I've asked most of them. So yeah, I'm very pro standardization. You'll realize this if you ever hear me talk. And I really want to change the industry so that we can obviously elevate the whole entire industry. I think that the industry is just, I love the equine industry on so many different levels. So the idea is, you know, can we make things better? Yes, we can. And if I have the ability and the opportunity to do that, then I'm kind of going for it.
Fantastic. We have a question here. Hello all, where can we get Bradley's books from, please? So I'll put that in the replay email.
I think they're out of print now because they're quite old. Not me to sound rude.
Oh,
I wrote them about
valuable.
a decade ago. Great.
Valuable classics then. You must definitely get them. I've got them. Okay. Right. I have questions from people who can't get on this, and we've already started. So I've looked in the email. I can't see anything there. Every message has been sent out. Please, could they check their junk mail? Because what can I do? Okay, Maria, let's now start with your presentation.
Okay. You wanna, yeah. So let's start here. You know, when we think about it, the saddle is not there just to, you know, make us have something, you know, between us and the horse. It came, you know, it was developed for a reason. And one of the main reasons is to offer the rider a little bit more stability, and also to offer the rider a chance to bring more stuff along. It could be weapons, or it could be things to catch cows or sheep with. It could be, you know, bringing more people on the horse, bringing whatever you own onto the horse, and you needed stability to keep stuff with you so it wouldn't slide or rock all over the place. And as we talk about stability, we need to talk about, what different things, you know, are there to kind of rock that stability. What is the problem?
Sorry, can I just, if you let me know when you're ready for your film.
Yeah, we'll plunk that in somewhere. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So I would like to ask some questions for the people here. If you bring on the next one, I have, like, you know, a lot of people may have felt that they are bouncing around a little more than they want to. Anyone wants to, you know, respond to that? And some may have felt like, you know, when they're turning the horse, either they are, you know, the horse is turning too fast, falling to the inside, or it's turning too little and they can't get it there. Some of you have felt like you end up maybe more on the outside of the horse when you're turning, and you're bending in the waist and you can't get to where you want to be. And some of you may have a very mobile horse. I hear that a lot from people I meet today. Oh, my horse moves all over the place. What we also hear is that, oh, I'm also hypermobile. And I think as an industry, because I'm in this for the same reason as Bradley, I want to change the industry. And we really have to change the industry. And that means we have to create a little bit of understanding of what goes on. So if we just move to the next one, I thought that we should talk about forces. And I'm hoping that Bradley has some great research on some of these things, because I've just basically put them up here. So let's look at the first thing that is making you bounce, and that is the ground force, right? So the ground force is when the horse meets the ground and the force travels up through the horse, and then it hits you as a rider, and then you bounce back on the horse's back, if you can't, if you're not posting or can't making the rhythm with the horse. So we have, this is the first problem, because the ground force and the horse moving, actually your body has to be able to absorb those forces, and it has to go through the whole body before it comes back down. And if you haven't absorbed it, you can't be effective, because the next hit is gonna hit before you're ready. And this actually puts a little bit, then you have to put thinking in, and I'm actually going to ask Bradley here what he's done, because it means that you need a density in your panel and in your saddle tree that actually matches the forces of the horse. Have you been looking at that, Bradley?
Oh, yes, and more.
Yay.
So things which we look at is obviously such as ground force. That is a relatively constant once you know the weight of the horse, and you can then understand the weight of the rider. You can calculate it. What we also then do, specifically to us, is we measure the density of the horse's musculature. And now that's a really difficult thing, because you're trying to essentially measure muscle tone. Now
before it's toned.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to consider things like hair and fat layers and various things like that as well. So this is where it becomes quite fascinating. So you can, we use something called a durometer, which is an industry standard in other industries, where you can then measure the density of the zone, the area which is having the saddle on. Now, what you also then have to factor in is how that tone or how that muscle changes from being theoretically relaxed to then being contracted. So we've had to do lots of research in terms of different horses at different performance levels and their variations in tone or muscle contraction. And the irony is, and this is giving a little bit of knowledge away, but hey ho, people know me, I'm quite free with it. If you ask, if you ask the right questions, you'll get the answers. So the thing is that actually muscle tone in a high performance horse, when it's relaxed and when it's competing, is actually quite similar. There's not that much variation in terms of the tone or the muscle density of a high performance horse when it is supposedly relaxed and kind of chilled out, compared to when the muscle is actually contracted. Now,
have you figured out the reason for that? Because I'm going to touch on that.
I'm
going to touch on balance and tension and relaxation when you have balance.
So we know the reason, like physiologically. Now the difficulty is, so that's why in some regards, creating a product for a high performance animal is relatively easy, because it's kind of consistent. So it's much easier to predict. The difficulty comes, which we all experience as saddle fitters, is the lower performance horses. And the problem is you can have a horse which is overtly relaxed. And then when the muscle contracts, you've got this big range of muscle tone from quite chilled out and relaxed, quite floppy, to then suddenly full on hard contraction when the horse is performing. And that is a real difficult kind of thing to solve in terms of this horse's, how do you pad? How do you protect that horse's back? How do you protect the rider? How do you cushion that extreme range from a muscle density of 15 or anything like that, and those are arbitrary numbers if you don't understand the scale, to then suddenly 35? That's quite a big range. Whilst a high performance horse is going to be averaging around about 26 and goes up to about 37, kind of 38, essentially the boundary of 15. Whilst you've got a boundary of about 20 to 25 in a unfit horse.
That means these don't even meet. Those curves don't even meet.
No, they don't. So we're looking at various things on how to help the industry and help customers. And we're producing protocols of our own creation and using our own science, which when they're fully ended and kind of we are confident in them, we will quite happily release them to the rest of the industry and other companies, just to give a standardization in some regards.
I thought it was important to ask you, because we have been testing with different densities of wool,
Yeah.
And it's quite surprising how big difference it does make to the horse if the wool is too soft.
Yeah.
You know,
and how you flock it, and even the material which it's wrapped in. Is it a leather panel? Is it a serge panel? Is there a foam lining to it? There's so many variations. Even if it's kind of automotive leather or fake leather, PU leather, they all make massive differences. And we're doing some very, we're currently in beta testing of some products which are very controversial, which are going to be coming out early part of next year, which is going to be great fun, because it's basically breaking rules. It's breaking kind of industry theoretical norms, and just asking questions as well.
So we just got to the first force, and you see we're full out of, it's completely mind-boggling. So I'll just try to get to the next force here, and that is speed and acceleration. So a lot of the problems we're seeing for riders is that they actually cannot handle acceleration today. And that is because a lot of them are already a little bit behind their own point of gravity. And they are then not able to resist when the horse speeds up. And if then the panel is a bit soft also, this problem will get even bigger. And it's the same when you have deceleration, when the horse stops or drops the front. The rider has to resist that. So there's a lot of things that the riders are having to deal with that they may not think about, that they're struggling with. But these things are causing riders to use a lot of tension in their body. And that tension is causing fatigue, pain, and it's also causing miscommunication with the horse. So speed and acceleration are important forces to deal with. And then when we go deeper into that, we have the centrifugal force. So every time you take a turn, every time you make a circle, you will be forced outward, and so will the horse. And the horse has its own body strategy to not fall out. But if the rider is falling out, we're actually bringing the horse with us because of our leverage, and that is the next force. So riders who cannot keep their own posture in the middle and centered will bring the horse outward. They will make the horse rotate outward, or they will bring the horse inward, all unintentionally. This is not what the rider is trying to do. This is unintentionally because of some body issues they may have, or because of how tall they are and the size of the horse, or how soft the horse is. So we know that leverage is a very, very big force that we need to calculate in when we try to figure out, what we need as a rider when we're talking about saddle, and also maybe when we're talking about the horse that we choose for ourselves. Because if we have a very tall upper body and choose a very small horse, or a very hypermobile horse, or a very weak horse, it is up to us to really make sure that we are core trained and able to stay centered, to help that horse stay centered and come up. Because if we move to the side, that horse will be struggling all the time and not able to come up, which means we're pressing it downward, and we are causing tension because the horse tries to stay under us. So if the saddle is too soft also, this becomes a huge problem. So I think we see more kissing spines today. We see more horse issues because a lot of the riders may not have as good control over the leverage as they need to. And they are riding either very mobile horses and uneducated horses that are not strong enough yet. So this is why I'm bringing this up, that we need to think about, what are we doing with our body, and how is that having effect on the horse? And then we're going to look at how much can we ask from the saddle. So you want to add something before we go to the next picture there, Bradley?
No, not at all. I know that there's been a couple of questions in the chat so far.
Yeah.
But
I'll read out the questions. Yeah. Before they get too many. So muscle mass could be one of the biggest variables over time. when it comes to long-term product usage, how is it addressed in the planning of the design, if it is?
Oh yeah, you have, this is the biggest challenge we have, is when to start with the horse, when we think it's ready to make a saddle, so that it doesn't change his posture or his muscle too much, because you have two different things. One is the posture, and the other one is the muscle. And what we're seeing mostly is that most horses have a downward posture in the front today, and they're high rearward. As they change, they're actually going to come up in the front. And that means we'll have another ratio between how high the saddle sits in the front and the rear. So yes, you do need to have a plan for that. And sometimes it means that a horse will actually grow out of one tree to another. And that then you do need to talk to the rider about that, depending on the age, the education of the horse and so forth, where to actually start, so that many people may want to start a little bit too early. So it's an important conversation of being able to look at the top line of the horse, have a discussion with the rider, what they're experiencing, what the problems are, and then making a plan that may include 1 month or 2 months of doing something before you actually get a saddle.
Bradley, do you need to add to that?
I have a slightly different view in terms of that, of course, because I have a different product. So this is the reasons why I very much turn around and go, right, you start with objective measurements. You've just got to measure something. You've got to have a starting frame. And what you do is you work with that horse as it develops. Now, I know what we've designed and what we're going through and creating is almost a procedural process, in terms of, if your horse is starting at this phase and the muscle density is this and so on and so forth, then we pad accordingly. Now, that's also where we encourage, and we actively encourage a lot of our fitters to have that constant communication and going back, because nothing needs to be a big change at every single time. It can be small minutiae changes, such as increasing the muscle density, increasing the material or the panel density and various things like that, rebalancing the rider. But we have developed a product which does a lot of that. So we have a slightly different opinion to Maria, which is she's very much of getting the horse to a point to then build from. Whilst we turn around and go, well, if you've called us up, then you want to start. So we're here to start with you on that journey, and to develop and grow. And that's why we do certain things which are very different to other companies. We actively encourage people to rent our products, not necessarily buy them. And we do all sorts of crazy things like that. But muscle density is a fascinating thing on a multiple levels, because you've got to consider the type of muscle. Are we talking about type 1, type 2, or type 2B, type 2A? And they're all different types of fast twitch, slow twitch muscle fibers, and they all have different fatigue points and so on and so forth. And vascularization, temperature, weather, climate, all of those have influences as well. So it's not just as simplistic as muscle density and where do you start. You've got to take in all of these variables. Even hair length has a difference in terms of numbers and panels and padding, and it's beautifully complex.
I agree.
Yeah. And when you can see patterns, you can create patterns, and it doesn't mean.
You can come there with a 2 millimeter shim and put it in the right spot, and it makes all the difference in the world to the horse.
Exactly. and that's the beauty of it. Is
yeah.
You sit there and you like. This is where I certainly love it. Is as a designer, manufacturer, fitter. I've been through it all. I've seen the whole complete spectrum. I fully appreciate the fitting experience compared to the design and manufacturing experience are totally different, and they're polarized. They're looking for different things. But when if you have somebody who's like a manufacturer and a fitter who are working together, dear God, you can move mountains. And it is absolutely fascinating when you're all honed into that kind of linear line.
I think there is one thing here that we see sometimes very hard when it comes to do this. If we have the fitters close to the riders, we can basically, be on call and come and see them quite often. Once the fitters start to travel and plan for coming up to an area where it takes 6 hours to drive or 4 hours to drive, and they can't be there as often, it becomes more trickier. So what we have tried to do now is to develop a system where we actually teach owners to measure the horses and keep track, and to get inspired by the differences that they can feel and see and feel under the saddle, so that we can help them in time. Because a lot of the time it will only be a couple of millimeters somewhere that things have changed. But those millimeters may matter a lot to that horse. So I'm totally with you that we have to make the underside much more changeable. Otherwise, we cannot meet the modern situation with horses being ridden so young and changing so much through their lifetime today.
Yeah, and that's where we kind of came up with that 2-part design, because it's just going, you need the equine tree to be flexible, so we designed it that way.
Yeah, I understand.
Which leads me on to the next question from the audience. What scope is there for using different types of numbner or pad to take the horse's muscle tone into account, rather than the saddle having to be ideal? Which is a really good question. Bradley,
want to start? I'm going to take the dog inside.
Right, who's asked that? Dorothy. Oh God, right, Dorothy. Why do you read my mind? It is a little bit frustrating that you kind of keep reading my mind. I think you're telepathically attached to me in some way. You are absolutely correct. So using different numbers and various things like that, they create different reactions. From a polypad to a typical cloth numbner to the new kind of super padded force distribution numbners. What you've got to remember is that fundamentally the industry is to a degree unstandardized. So the problem is you can have a numbner which is a polypad, and you fit the saddle to the horse with a polypad, and then all of a sudden the customer changes the product or changes the numbner, and now the saddle doesn't work. And you as a manufacturer get blamed that the saddle doesn't work. So this is again going why you have to almost create an industry which has some form of official testing or standardization or anything like that, because otherwise there's a lot of confusion which can happen. I know from personal experiences, I built a product for a customer which was all calculated to weight values of the rider and everything like that. So we knew compression volumes of foam and muscle density and all of that fun stuff. And then the customer went off and lost loads of weight, which was fantastic. And you kind of like, brilliant, well done. But the problem was then the customer was riding in the saddle and was basically being bounced out of the saddle because we had over padded the saddle for that. We had originally done it to a very heavy weight, and then all of a sudden the rider had lost, I think it was about 18 kilos, and suddenly the padding was too much, and the rider was getting bounced out. So, and we were kind of like, oh no, that's not a problem. We need to solve that. But the problem was also that happens with numbers. Numbers do exactly the same thing. So you're looking at different materials in numbers. So you suddenly look at saddles and you look at panels and you look at protection. And then you have to look at what numbers they're using. And
can we agree that there is a lot of headroom for making better pads where we actually know what they're calculated for kind of weight and what kind of sports and what kind of speed even?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what you need. You need a system. You need a universal language between all manufacturers, so that we're all understanding.
Yeah. Based on weight and forces and what we're actually intending to do with the horse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Can I move to the next picture?
Just one more question. Is there a place where we can read those findings, the results of different density of wool, etc., which you mentioned earlier, Maria?
You cannot read. You can read. I have designed a course, a VBR course about saddles, and it brings up the different wools. We show the different wools, but there is no actual measuring of the density on the wool, because it will depend, like Bradley say, on how much you put in, how hard you stuffed it, and how big panel you have. So this comes down to just knowing that this kind of wool will have a lower density. It will fill the panel full, but it will have no density. Or this kind of wool, you don't need to put that much in because it has a thicker fiber, a stronger, more dense fiber, and it will not make the panel balloon, but it will make it more firm. So that's in that course that we made.
You just to add in to that is a lot of companies, saddle companies, they do a lot of the testing, but in-house and privately, so they don't share that universal data. And you know, various companies will do testing on wool, on foam, on different materials, but they all keep it in-house because that's essentially their intellectual property. That's their intelligence. So there is an argument to be had by governing bodies to basically create a universal database. You know, we need a universal database in order for manufacturers to go to, for saddle fitters to go to you know, understand all of that, because this is, you know, ultimately the end goal is not necessarily to make millions of pounds of money, because you're not when you're generally going into saddling. What you're doing is you're going into the industry to A, protect horses, B, protect customers, i.e. the riders, C, protect the industry. So you do kind of need an industry which is going to support and turn around and go, right, we need to actually create some form of structure here for the industry, for the future. This isn't just here and now. We've got to think, you know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ahead, because material science is moving, you know, like a truck. It's so quick. You know, even stuff which was 3 years innovatory, you know, 3 years old, now is old hat. You know,
we need guidelines, and I know that everyone who's a fitter who's out there would benefit from guideline and from, you know, deeper knowledge, deeper science, and more guidelines, and we just have to drive that forward. That's one of the reasons we're talking here. We wish that some people go back and say, okay, you know, who else can participate in bringing these guidelines?
And I think from the research point of view, they need a method of being able to test this as they fit, so that would determine the fit for them. And unfortunately, the technology isn't quite there. We can use pressure mats, but they have limited application.
Plus, they tell us very little about the panel itself.
But
I would say that there are good fitters out there who have the experience. So what we have not done, which is sad, is that the fitters have not gotten together and said, okay, how can we document what we have learned, what we experienced? Because a lot of posts I put out, fitters come back and say, I see that. And I have now gone, okay, how can we quantify what fitters see? How can we collect it and create something out of it, and not just disregard it, as manufacturers very often do? So fitters are stuck between customers and manufacturers, and they don't very often get listened to.
No, and it has to be part of the fitting process, certainly for the precision rider. At Your Horse Live, I took about 50 imprints, templates of the pelvic floor of a variety of people. Every single one of them was different, but it was an excellent way of being able to determine what the rider's default posture was, their factory settings, so that, you know, they do need to go off and address that, and many of them do, but I think we need a clear picture so that the fitter can say, well, here's what I see from you, and here's what we need to work towards, because this saddle is going to work a lot better when the horse and rider are better prepared and fit for purpose for the saddle. You can't keep making the saddle fill the gaps that the horse and rider are making. So we have, yes, Dorothy again, rolling on the floor or the flocking, laughing about being your sister, ethereal sister. And oh yes, we do need to think about matchy with these saddle pads. So that's
just
of course
going back to the testing of materials. There's a way of doing that which does not involve horses in any way, shape, or form. You know, there's standard industrial testing which exists.
Yes.
You know, we use hydraulic press calculations, like density compression tests. You just need to start. I'm not saying you need to start the process and be perfect straight away, but we need to have a process which is just started, you know, and there are ways to do that, like the flocking testing. The way we've done flocking testing is putting the flock in a hydraulic press, basically, and we've always filled the flock to a certain volume, to a certain kind of thing. We haven't put it within a material. We've just then filled essentially a square bucket to a certain volume, and then we've put a hydraulic press on top of it. And then we've calculated all of that. So we've created standardized testing processes, and those already exist in terms of foam. They already exist in terms of other materials. So you just sit there and go, it's actually fundamentally very easy to do.
It's out there. How, you know, Bradley, question. Is it so that a lot of fitters could buy something to test the density with? Is it easy to come by?
Yeah. If you're talking about density of material, then you can basically, there are what we call testing houses in the UK, which are basically facilities which are set up to test materials. We use one, and we use one which isn't actually affiliated with horses in any way, shape, or form. Actually, they do Formula One stuff, so we use them. And military gear, you know, we don't want to use stuff which can potentially create a bit of bias in terms of who you are and what you're creating. What you can also do is there's something called a durometer, which is a handheld material product, which you can buy, and it has a little button basically which you can press, and it goes in. Now, depending, you then create, and that's what we've done. We've created a procedure in order to standardize the pressure, because obviously if it's a handheld material, it varies depending on how hard you're pressing. Yeah. So we created a system where basically you can put the durometer on a material and then balance a set weight on top, and because you're standardizing the weight, you then get a standardized kind of density test. And that's what we do in-house before we then ship out to do further testing at a higher level. You know, a lot of the testing and a lot of the product design which we've done in our whole process and are continuously doing, a lot of it starts off with me sat in a garage thinking of a crazy idea and then creating ways to test it. And if that theory works.
And I'm thinking that sometimes some of these crazy ideas that we have come up with, we just start to share some of them with other fitters, because it may be so then that suddenly we have 10 crazy people out there with a little durometer and saying, oh, this kind of wool actually is shit because this thing just goes straight through it. And that way, you know, with the industry of the fitters will start to weed out what they don't want to work with anymore.
Yeah, and that's what we do. We actually give our fitters, and you know, where to get the durometers, you know, how to use it, because there's different durometers for different densities. So we do all of that. You know, we're starting to kind of really push the aspects of independent assessment, and it's also beneficial for a manufacturer, because if you've got multiple fitters which are doing kind of objective testing, all of that information is coming to a manufacturer, and then all of a sudden that can hone their design a hell of a lot
That's
more.
how we got about 5,000 pelvises.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Is you sit there and just go, it's numbers game. It's no longer opinion based. You sit there and go, these are the facts. This is how it is. And that's what you need to move more towards, is more of that objective kind of, almost like the bike and cycling industry, rather than kind of necessarily having, objective. You want objective. You don't want subjective. You don't want necessarily gurus. You want to kind of remove the
we need to go
personality.
leave the religious
Yeah,
state.
exactly. You need to remove that.
Which leads me on to the next question, the next statement from Laura. There is a problem with the industry which panders to the elite riders when in fact the majority of riders are average, and the majority are female as well, and the majority are in pain, or three. I think we need to stop selling the dream and work on the reality. Oh, what do riders want, the dream or the reality?
Yeah, it comes down to a little bit what I was talking about before, that there are some horses that we see that are so dysfunctional when we see the picture of them, that if we put a saddle on them, we wouldn't be doing them any service, because they're too rotated, too down, and they're too sore. They have too many compensations. And it actually comes down to us having a chat with that owner and saying, asking, how does it feel? Can you ride this horse? Are you guys happy together? And normally they are not happy and they're having a lot of problems. And at that state, we take a step back and say, okay, would you like to try something that might actually change this and change how your horse feels about being with you, change, the balance of things, and get the horse ready so that when we do fit it, things will be easier. And a lot of people are taking that wise decision of, stepping back, doing something different, and then coming back with a horse that has the strength to carry them without falling downward and rotating, which brings me to the next picture here.
Can I just get Bradley's feedback or comments on what Laura has suggested?
Yeah.
Laura, as always, she's ahead of the curve, like a lot of other people. The beautiful part is, I absolutely wholly agree with her. We're keeping going for this elite kind of element, and not everybody's elite. Not everybody can afford an elite horse. I can only speak about what I've done in terms of creating and things like that. We create a product and we come up with my crazy idea, and then I give it to my what we call alpha testers, and they're a group of people which I trust wholly and deeply, and they're not going to suddenly run off with one of my crazy ideas or anything like that. That then hones the product, and then what we do is we go to our beta group, and our beta group is what is politely nicknamed the problem group, and they are a bunch of people with a variety of problems, from kissing spines to hock issues to back issues in the rider to knee injuries, hip issues with the riders, everything. So you create a product. My view is you create a product which works for perfect. And then what you do is you go, right, now actually apply it to reality. Let's give it to the horses with kissing spines. Let's give it to horses with shoulder issues. Let's give it to horses with hock issues. Let's give it to riders with back issues. And it's got to work for them. It's, that's, and Laura's absolutely right. The vast majority, that's who you're catering for. There's no point trying to cater for the elite. The elite are easy. It is.
Yeah, they're stabilized and fit.
Exactly. They're stabilized. They ride 8 horses a day. They're core strong. The horses are well toned. They're shod every 4 weeks. It's relatively easy. They are Formula One cars to a degree. The honing, the minutiae is really important with those. But you're trying to eke out 0.5% in terms of performance. The biggest change and the biggest difference you'll make is Jeff the cob, who's got crap, pardon my language, but crap feet and everything like that. That's where you're going to make the best benefit, by actually sitting down with that customer and talking them through the procedures and the processes and how you can support that horse, how you can support that rider in a variety of different ways. I'm certainly tired of manufacturers which are trying to produce products which are more for the elite, and actually there's very little for the lower end. And it frustrates me. So yeah,
I think the problem here becomes also that because riders don't have their own knowledge of who they are, what their body type is, what their horse body type is, they are only met with the advertising of what the elite riders are saying, which is leading these riders to come and ask you, what elite rider rides in this saddle? Instead of asking, would this saddle suit me and my horse? And this is really, a thing where you have to turn back and say, okay, which one of these elite riders do you look like?
Yeah.
Which one of these elite riders have your settings, and which horse do they ride that is like yours? And then it would be not a very comfortable conversation.
You're a lot braver to have that conversation than I am. I will freely admit I'm a bit of a coward. I will kind of go, right, okay.
That's a whole other summit, actually, which I have on the list. Yeah, we do need to talk about fitting protocol and what we can do and what we need to know. And we're going to have to catch up pretty quickly.
Now,
Laura
let's move forward, because we are getting stuck in questions.
Yeah.
I know. Laura says, agree 100%, Bradley. Okay, over to you, Maria.
Okay, so on elite riders, so there are 3 major things that riders can help the horses to do better, or that riders can basically make sure the horse can't do. So this is like a triangle with a base. So we can read it from the top, but really we should be reading it from the bottom, because it works bottom up and top down on the horse. So first of all, we need a horse to be able to engage its hind end. And it does that by actually stabilizing its back and using its braking power. And there are a lot of things that we are making the horse lift the hind legs too early instead of using its stabilization or braking phase. So the rider really need to be aware of where they end up on the back, and the saddle decides that in very many ways. Because as soon as you're too far back on the horse, things will start to happen. So if the hind isn't working, then we get a little bit of a problem with the horse self-carriage in the front. Because if you cannot hold the whole heavy body from moving too fast over the front leg, the body mass will actually move too fast over the front leg. And this means that the horse will push off with the front leg a little bit too late. And it's then pushing forward instead of upward. Okay. And as it's doing this, you're already starting to get problems with rotation, because it's not able to stabilize its body. So it starts to rotate in the rib cage. And this is also something that the rider's leverage and weight and way of using the body has an impact on. So we can do a lot of things as riders to help the horse to engage, get the push up in the front, and stay in the middle to actually be able to push the withers up and stay up. And these are our essential things when we start to look at the saddle and what we actually do with the rider. So let's move to the next one there. And I want to move to the rider.
Okay.
Or to the horse.
Two very quick comments. One from me. You talk about stability, but the English saddles are generally not wide enough to support the rider mediolaterally from side to side. They're just not. And I have found this using my horse simulator. That's what riders really struggle with, is stabilizing side to side.
Laterally,
the seats are not wide enough.
No.
And then it also comes down to affordability. 100%. Innovation is what we need, but if it's not affordable for the average amateur, the evolution will be stunted. That's where it's at. That's the big picture. And just thinking of the country I work in and the market here, compromising on saddles happens on an uncomfortable level due to lack of knowledge as well as price. So yes, we didn't say this was ever going to be easy.
No, it isn't. It is, but you see, good design. Once you know what good design is, it's not necessarily much more expensive. It's about changing how you do the procedures and making things in a factory. And once you establish new procedures, it suddenly isn't as hard or as expensive. The hard thing is to get people who maybe never did it that way to think about maybe doing it that way.
Okay, so it's great that we're all talking. Over to you and your slide, Maria.
Okay, so now we just talked about the riders, and like you said, we had the vertical movement, moving forward and backward, and the lateral movement of coming to the sides. And then we look at, okay, what do the horses look like today, and what parts of the horse are unstable in the first place. So we normally today we have a little bit of a weaker neck, and we ride them earlier. Then you have the rib cage and neck junction that is very much under pressure today, because if the nose gets down, that this junction gets pressed down and compressed. Then we have the back and the pelvic junction that is also weak. We are basically training horses 4 years before this junction has grown together and can withstand the horse engaging properly or speeding properly or jumping a lot or doing a lot of collection. So what I've done here is basically I made a little chart and said, okay, what will cause instability in a horse and what may make that horse more stabilized? So if you have a very young horse that is untrained, it will have less stability. If you have a horse with very long limbs, it normally will have less stability. If it has a very long shoulder, that shoulder blade will move more and further, and there will be lack of ligaments that create stability. Today we have starting to get a high ratio of the ECVM, which is then a malformation in the junction between the first rib and the first neck vertebrae. And then we have the horses that are called hypermobile, and they come in both Icelandic, in Spanish horses, and in warm blood. So we have a lot of hypermobile horses because the way we bred them, and they then have a large range of motion. So if we don't add any stability training to this young horse, if we don't help this horse to get a better proprioception and work with, having stronger muscles and stabilizing, if we add an unstabilized rider and a very soft saddle, you can imagine that we get larger problems. So then as it comes into medium, you may have a sturdier horse. You have a lot of cobs in UK, and they will actually probably withstand a lot more than all these warm bloods do. So there's a good reason for riding them if they're not too wide for you. So a horse that isn't as long-legged, or that is a bit more sturdy, that has a wider rib cage, that is not hypermobile, that horse will be slightly more stabilized. And if you get further down with education and you've done some training, it will have more muscle mass, and it would be able to deal with unbalances easy. And then you get to, the most stabilized horses are the ones that have been most trained. They may have been a bit sturdier and had less range of moment from the start, but you can actually shorten the range of moment in horses. And that's what the really good riders do with dressage horses today. You limit the range of motion. You create movements that are actually shorter to get these horses so that they don't end up where they are too far out and get fatigued. So if we move to the next picture, you'll see where I'm going with this.
Okay. Quick comment from Laura. Research and development has to be paid for. No one should subsidize someone else's hobby. So, yeah, there is a cost to this.
Well, it's a cost to what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of really good student studies out there that never see the light of day. So it's really, we're only taking notice of the published articles, but there is a lot of free stuff out there. But
you see, this is where I start looking at the industry and going, right, we actually need to create a cycle going on here. So I agree with what Laura's talking about, but it shouldn't necessarily come from companies like Maria's and mine and various things like that. Yeah. This is the reasons why I talk about standardization, because if there's a standardization, that means there's a testing protocol. If there's a testing protocol, we have to pay for it. If I want to sell a product and I have to want to sell it on the market, then I have to pass the testing protocol of the organization which I'm kind of wanting to do it with. That I could pay that process. I could pay for that. That means the organization then takes on that money. That money can then be spent on research within the industry as a whole.
Yeah, so they could approve our products. They could test and approve our products, create the standards, provide the testing. I've been asking for that for 25 years.
And the thing is that already exists. Like, I'm an osteopath by trade. You know, that's my origin. That is.
Yeah.
We do that. My registration and everything like that pays for research to be done by people who are far more intelligent than I. But the thing is that if I want to add to it, I can as an independent. Now, this is what needs to happen. And this is where I get really frustrated with the organizations, because I'm sat there going, you're struggling with money, you're struggling to get people in, you're struggling to get younger generations in. You sit there and go, there is a way of creating an income and a standardization which then protects the horse, protects the customer, protects the manufacturer, protects the fitter, all of that type of stuff. Why can't you do this? I'll be more than happy if you turn around and go, right, you know, this is the standard. You know, that all of a sudden I know where I've got to hit. At the moment there is nothing, so I could create a product and I could put glass and nails in it and still sell it, and you know, and that's not healthy for anybody, and that's just ethically wrong. And you should be sat there with organizations which are actually actively wanting you to do research and testing which pushes their boundary, but they've got to have their boundary of research which pulls everybody back in. You know, I could go off and do research into some very weird and wonderful things like gyrometrics and gyroscopic kind of all this type of weird stuff. But at the end of the day, I need an organization which is actually going to A, protect me as a manufacturer, B, protect my customers, C, protect my fitters, D, protect the horse, E, protect the... And I have approached organizations and said, if you do this, you get an income, you can do that. That then pays for the next process. And it becomes almost an environment, a healthy environment in terms of elevating.
It should come out of universities, because there should be, you know, should come out of universities now that should feel that they have a drive to do this, and that they may have students that be able to put it together and do it.
I pitched an idea, which is something called, to want of a better word, it's called the community diamond. So it is an idea basically that you have businesses, you then have organizations, you know, such as, you know, SMS. Let's just use the SMS as an organization. You know, they're the government. They're the people in charge, basically. Then you've got your local community, and then you've got your macro community. You know, and all of these kind of four groups should basically be working together. And I wrote an article on it, and you know, like most things which I write and everything like that, it all kind of falls a bit flat, which is quite hilarious. But you sit there and go, if you could, because you know, businesses, organizations, education, businesses want to get stuff done. Like, that's the thing. You know, organizations, they've got structure, they've got the contacts. You know, education is you know, they do all the research, they want to actually improve, they want to sit down and do all the nerdy stuff. And then the community, the community which you're in, is then distributing it and talking about it, and it all becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. And you just measure on it when you're sat there.
It's like there is a simple formula. It exists in almost every other industry, but for some reason there's nobody driving it here. And the problem you and me have is that we are looked at as biased because we actually started to design saddles because we were frustrated with how things were. so you know, we shouldn't have done that.
But this is also, shouldn't have done. But this also goes back to an earlier question which talks about innovation. And I sit there and go, innovation within an industry is essentially pushed by the hierarchy. And I mean this in the most polite way possible. But if you have turnover of athletes. Now, I see it in cycling because I've worked in cycling. I see it in Formula One because I've worked in Formula One. I see it in other sports where you sit there and go, there's such tight improvements that athletes are fighting, quite literally the lower tier athletes are fighting to try and get the next product. Now, the problem we have in the equestrian industry is that you've got a professional who might be at the top of their game for 30 years. And the problem is that you cannot then go for the lower tier in terms of, you know, businesses and everything like that, because you want to sell more products. So the problem is that top tier sits there and it stagnates innovation, because everyone's trying to basically go for that big person who's won their 4th gold medal or whatever. And you're sat there going, that is what is stagnating, is the lack of turnover of performance athletes, which is frustrating, because you're sat there.
I think one of the problems is that riders don't know what they should or could expect from a saddle.
Yeah.
So the industry has asked saddles, and it's basically been, oh, I bounce over here, or this happens. I need a higher knee block. I need a higher cantle. I need a little bit more padding there. And the industry didn't think, oh, is this because this rider looks this way and has horses like this? Or is everyone going to need it? Yeah. So that's where it's stagnating, that we're not talking about innovation in the way we should.
Yeah, and what you said earlier is that very rarely, you know, saddle manufacturers, myself included in this as well, you know, you're busy looking at your end consumer. You're busy looking at the rider. You're not necessarily speaking to the people on the ground, which you should be. You should be talking to the fitters. You should be dealing with, you know, you should build a product, and that's what I've very much tried to do, and very much tried to do from my own experience being a fitter, and much like yourself, Maria. You sit there and go, right, what is a product which I would want as a fitter, not as a rider. You know, the rider in some regards is important, but it needs to work for the fitter, because ultimately the fitter is the most important person in this kind of like.
And that's not such a hard equation, because I used to talk to manufacturers before, and I said to them that today it's not stores, it's fitters. So a saddle that you make needs to win very many times when you go out and try it on horses. And that means that you have a good product. Start tweaking that one that you already have that wins a lot, because the fitters like working with it. Ask them why they like it. Ask them how you can make that product better, because that's where we get development. So that, you know, I said when I started, we're going to be a company that works outside in. We collect the information from the outside, and then we transform it into the factory. And I think that is what's going to change the industry. I also meet a lot of ladies who have tried to do what I do, to go into the industry and design saddles. And sadly, most of us get met with the idea that we really don't know what we're doing, because we're not saddlers.
Yep.
And we, you know, are asking the saddlers to do things that they don't want to do. So they'll do it once or twice, and then they'll do it in another way.
Yep.
And this is causing, you know, a lot of female inventors, female fitters who are trying hard out there to get better products, to actually give up.
Oh, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I will openly turn around and go, there is a inherent bias between men and women in terms of innovation and creation. I'm so bloody minded. You know, I've been bashing my head against this for essentially 3 years. And I'm stubborn, but I will, you know, I will walk into a room, and naturally people will listen to me because of my, and I'm not me to sound rude, I'm 6'5" and a fairly big guy. You're gonna listen. I'm relatively commanding.
You know how I have to do it? I have to walk into a room where I have demanded that people figure out how to put billets on so that they're always in the exact place.
Yeah.
And they will go, everybody hates you. And I'll have to say, yes, that's because I'm doing my job. And then I will have to be at them for a year before they actually give in and create the procedure that I asked them for the first day.
Yep, I know, and this is the problem. I wholeheartedly, you know, it is 10 times worse for women in terms of trying to create and innovate.
Could that be why this industry is moving so slowly? Most of the fitters are women, most of the riders are women.
Yeah, not me to sound rude. There is an inherent asymmetry in terms of saddle manufacturers being more masculine and leatherworkers being more masculine compared to females within the industry. But it is predominantly dominated by the male kind of ego and everything like that, and that is also a problem in terms of. So I tip my hat to you, Maria, in terms of kind of being bloody minded like myself and just keep going. I've got one or two things stacked in my favor, being masculine and various things like that, but also having other industries which I can pull.
I guess what we in the end stack in our favors as females is that we start to learn to work together.
Yeah,
and as we absolutely do and learn from each other, we actually start to understand how we can lift each other up and work better. I'm going to move on that.
Yes, I just got another comment here. The industry is standing on the shoulders of the amateurs, so we do need to be catering for the majority rather than the minority. Two comments I've got is that the industry has not yet been forced to consider the saddle as a piece of sporting equipment. That's where the difference lies, and that's what's different about our industry.
And this is exactly why we're talking about forces.
Yeah.
And stability.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. Another quick point, when you had confirmation on the previous slide, I would call that posture, because regardless of confirmation, if a horse can move well with that with a lift, then that could be, you could ride a Shetland pony in a Grand Prix test.
But I think what I talk about confirmation is the height of certain spinoses, how elliptic the horses is in the rib cage, because if the more elliptic they are today, the more motion they have. And also it's a little bit like, if you take a sports car, it's really low. And it's really low because it's going to handle forces. It's not going to have leverage and all that. And today we bred horses that are a little bit like you. If you take the old Volkswagen, the bus, what you call it. And then we put big wheels on it and a big engine on it. So it's, it lacks stability from pure size. And when you added force to that pure size, you need to add brakes and you need to add what you call it, the springs, shock absorbers. You need to bring all those things, to be able to do things. And instead of putting those things onto the horse early, we like to bring it out to a competition ring early. So we forget about putting the shock absorbers and making the brakes work to harness things. And when I then come to the rider stability, which is on this picture, if you then take that horse that hasn't been harnessed and trained in that way already, and that doesn't have the brakes that it needs, it doesn't have the muscles that it needs, and then we start looking at what we've been working with, you and me, Caroline, is how stable are the riders. So you have two things to look at here, and one is the training level of the rider. How fit are you? How much core training and coordination training have you done? How strong are you? What's your do you have control over how your shoulders go, where your rib cage go, where your hips go, where your ankles and feet go, or do you not? And I would say that this fitness level, I put it about size and weight, because as we saw in another webinar we did together, core fitness can very quickly out-trump being heavy. So we don't have to say, oh, I'm so heavy, or I'm this size, I can never do this. Well, in reality, we found that you can put people on the training program and very quickly they can make a difference on their horse. So the quickest and cheapest way, we're talking about sport, and we're talking about maybe not having to get the most expensive saddle, is to actually look at ourselves and look at our fitness level. And I would say that, I used to be in the green. Right now, I'm in the red, because I have, put on weight. I have a really bad foot and quite a bad hip. And I'm not doing the training I would need to get back on the horse and help it to stabilize the way it should. So we take for granted that the great riders, they're just great riders, but they also have those things on their side. Boom.
Can I just got one more question from the audience?
Yeah.
I know everybody's going to be replaying this because, it's very fast moving. We are down a rabbit hole here, but all this stuff needs to be said.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if saddles could be an epigenetic factor of the types of horses that are being produced. Could you answer in one sentence definitively, Bradley, then Maria, and we must move on.
Somebody needs to explain the word to me.
Bradley?
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's certainly what we're finding in terms of it is a major factor to the type of horses.
So horses types are driving the saddle design, possibly, or an area of it.
Yes.
Okay, both agreed?
Yeah.
Right. Maria.
Boom. Next picture. We would put these out. So I just want to touch on this because riders can be tested. So if you don't know where you're at, and if you end up in the right picture a lot, there is a reason. And it's not that hard to figure it out, what part of your body that's not doing what it should. If it's your feet and ankles, if it's your hips, if it's your shoulder and rib cage, or, those are the main things. It's not very hard to get a focus program to work on 2 or 3 things to get our stability to be so much better and for us to be so much more centered. That's all I want to say. It's like, don't give up. Don't think that you can't fix it, because we see that a lot of riders can make a huge difference in just 2-3 weeks.
Or 2-3 minutes, depending on the change that's needed. A lot of them can improve the horse's movement by the way they adjust their posture. Yes.
Yeah.
So, keep the faith, everyone. It doesn't have to be.
Basically, it's like you have to have your back stacked up above your pelvis in a way that it will not sag down when you relax. You should not be forced to use tension to keep yourself in a vertical posture. If you have to use a lot of tension to keep yourself vertical, your saddle is ruining it for you, and you're falling back, and you are basically using tension for the wrong things, and you're not going to be able to stabilize. So if you can relax and stay in a vertical position, you're fine.
Yes, which can be a challenge.
Let's move.
Okay, let's move.
Okay, so now I come to the function of the tree. And this is, what we were really talking about. So it is to stabilize the rider for the purpose of the discipline. We're all realizing that we do very different things with horses, different speeds, different times, and at different levels. So, we don't have to go all in for a saddle that somebody uses if we're going to ride 2 times a week or 3 times a week or for a short while. So we have to think about that. It's also there to protect the horse and rider from instability that reduces stability for the horse to carry the rider with the correct posture. So we need a saddle tree to somehow put the rider in the right place on the horse, and for the tree then not to cause discomfort or pressure points or instability. It also needs to be protecting the horse from fatigue. And fatigue is really caused by tension. And if you think about tension where you're sitting right now, is that if you have instability, a lot of the tension that you will actually use is to try to compensate for that instability, right? So we have a lot of horses out there that you come out to and they are rock hard in the back. And it's not because the rider is doing something really, really wrong. It's just that you have an instability with something moving too much up and down or side to side, and the horse has to resist that every step of the way. And then that will create other issues. So tension, we tend to think that horses tense or that we have to go and have somebody fix tension. tension usually comes from instability and the wrong muscles having to compensate. So I've been looking at it, and I've put 6 levels of trees, but I want you to look at the bottom picture. This is a 3D scan of a horse. And if you look at, it's on the left side here because the horse is facing us. But it's really on the right side of the horse. So the horse is really narrower. It's falling down right behind the withers there. So this horse has been rotating. It's been losing some muscle. And when you look at it from the side, it also has some other issues. So we are actually a lot of the time asking the saddle to fit something and to be symmetrical and fit something and not put pressure on top of a horse that's almost never symmetrical. So what happens in this case is that you will get more pressure on the left side. Or then you may think that you should pad the right side, and maybe you should, but if it's a rotation, that pad may not be needed 15 or 20 minutes later if you solve the lateral issue with the horse and the rider. So it's not as easy as the customer may think to do the right call. Are we going to shim a little and then remove? When do we remove? How do we train the rider to know? How do we know if the rider can ride in a way that's going to straighten the horse? How do we know what happens on the way when the physio and the farrier and the trainer comes there? So, just saying that, I understand why Bradley's gone the way he has, because this is tricky. Okay, let's move to the next one. You're going to have to ship in here, Bradley, I think. I've basically said that, if we're going to go for like what has no stability, and it would be a very soft treeless saddle that may not have the big chunky front things that presses down around the shoulders. And it may be a riding pad. On the other hand, a riding pad doesn't have stirrups. So the rider may well find their lateral balance better on the riding pad and sit more centered in the riding pad than they would in a saddle. Yes, having said that. And then you come to the flexible trees, and those are normally, the soft plastic trees that have no core and they bend very easy. We'll show the film right after this one, I think. And then you have plastic trees that do resist when you bend them, but they don't have any reinforcement in the front, so they heat them. And normally a lot of these trees that you can heat, they will change the shape in the front a little bit. So they may be good on certain type horses, but when the horses start to get really narrow and have some atrophy, they get to under 75 degrees in angle in the width in the front, they cannot really resist when the rider comes down in the stirrups and land after like a jump or in a higher speed. And that means they will open a little bit. And we used to see this in some plastic trees quite a lot over here and in US. So depending on the weight of the rider and the fitness and what you're using that tree for, it will, be better or worse for you. And then we have like the medium stability, which is where we operate today. Those are the light birchwood trees, the more sportic type of trees that you can bend them a little bit, but not a lot. And they're not so heavy. And they will have some give in the seat also. And they normally have a reinforced either metal in the part in the wood tree. And some of them have reinforced metal also in front of the plastic trees. And then, in the really good stability, we actually have the old English type saddles that used to have really hard, a little bit heavier trees. And I can see also why those were beneficial in the market where you had a lot of people hunting or riding cobs and doing what they were doing, because you wanted to have basically any type of rider on those type of horses. And I'm also looking at riding schools and other places where you have to maybe have larger riders that may not be that laterally stable or vertically stable. You may need more stability in that tree. And then I see sometimes people who would actually almost benefit from a tree that stabilizes just like a Western or a military type saddle tree would. because they go down on the sides deeper. They don't come up and sit so tight to the spine. So they will cover the sides of the horses. And if they're well fitted, they would be beneficial for a lot of larger riders that may, ride horses that are not as strong or as stable as they need to be to carry that type of rider. We see that in the Icelandic, for example, a lot of quite heavy people riding very small, today quite mobile horses. So that's my chip in there. I'll leave it to Bradley there.
Okay, so we're going to just, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, did you want to come back? Anything on that slide?
Me?
Oh, no, Bradley. No. This is the crux of the flexible versus the inflexible saddle, which we were down a rabbit hole about. So this is what this summit is all about.
Yeah, essentially, I'm the one who sat here and looking at either end of that spectrum and going, I'm doing that idiot thing, which is I'm trying to make something which is highly flexible for one creature and highly rigid and structured and stable for another. And that's what I'm doing. So I wholeheartedly agree with that spectrum. I completely agree with it.
That's how it looks today.
yeah, exactly. So you sit there and kind of go, right, well, I'm the Muppet who's decided to try and, well, I'm not just the only idiot who's trying to do it, but there's what you've also got to factor in is so this is where I when you start looking at what I've got, I call myself we are a hybrid saddle. So we're kind of trying to fit two ends of the spectrum into essentially one singular product. But you've got to remember is that there's a lot of products out there which is what we call adaptive hybrid products, and those can be like semi-flex saddles and various other kind of products which are out there, which are taking a rigid, so for example, a rigid tree structure, and then what they're doing is they're trying to make it more flexible in a variety of different ways. And there's different ways to make a product more flexible. Some have done it through kind of cutting the tree and making the actual tree more flexible, like a semi-flex. Other people have then tried to do it by making the gullet bar more flexible, like the hinged gullet bar or the butterfly gullet bar is what they call it. So, what we're all trying to achieve in some regards is this middle ground. That is this kind of optimum kind of, we want medium stability. And then obviously then you've got to either accentuate for the rider or kind of reduce for the horse. So you've got this kind of polarizing effect going on between horse and rider.
Mm-hmm. So and if you look at jockeys and race horses, you have minimal people with perfect athletes. They can ride with almost no saddle and stay. That's where the sport may move towards, but it's certainly not where 90% of the ride are going to move towards.
Oh God, no. but this is the problem. Is you suddenly sit there as a fitter and as somebody who's involved in the industry. You look at this scale. And, it's not unsurprising that there's so much controversy between different product lines and different fitters and how you fit it, because it's not necessarily the problem of the product. Sometimes it can actually be the problem of how they fit it. And you have this, what we call confirmational bias, which exists. A fitter may train to fit a saddle or a certain company's saddle which is highly more flexible, but they don't agree with it, or they may pick and choose certain components of it and then apply it to other products, and then those products end up failing not because they're poor products, but because the fitting procedure is not followed to the letter. So you then created almost this weird environment where everyone's trying to achieve the same thing, but nobody's really listening, and everyone's trying to do what they think is best. And there's all of this kind of dotting around of knowledge, and all of it is relevant, all of it is important. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to reach this middle ground, this proverbial middle ground between highly stable products and flexible products. And Maria's trying to do it in a different way to that I'm trying to do it. Does it mean that one's right and one's wrong? Well, no, they're both right, but they're both right for their own product lines. But they can both learn from each other's product lines as well.
And make cater to slightly different situations sometimes. So it's like I've taken this thing on today as of us not being on the opposite side, but really looking at, what is really important in this industry that we start to understand. It's forces, mobility, stability, flexibility. And if we look at it together, then we will all start to think about, where am I? Where's my horse? Where's my thing? And that's where I want to go. I don't know if we should show that film before we go to panels, because I have one thing on panels and that's it.
Yeah. Just very, very quickly, just what I need to reiterate here, or that you're beginning to see, or that many of you may have known already, is that you match the saddle or the flexibility of the saddle in the first instance to the stability of the rider and the stability of the horse. And also, I just wanted to say, because I did run a little poll, that many flexible saddles, I think about a quarter of them, are supplied to horses that can't have a rigid one. So it's not everyone's choice to have either rigid or flexible. So that's where we're a little bit hazy at the moment in the industry about what to do with these different types of saddles. So it's great that we're able to talk about the prescription of these types of saddles, and we will get there. Okay, so next slide. What I must say is that we should have finished a minute ago. I can't remember how many slides you've got, Maria, but we will finish them. And I would, rather than upset everyone, I would ask you both if you would like to come back, and then we would finish this discussion, or finish your slides, Bradley. Sorry, you keep getting shortchanged by putting last. But if we could come back, and then we can relax and finish this as a part 2.
Oh, I really want to be controversial today as well.
Oh, let's be controversial then. Oh, we save that for next time. So we will let Maria finish, obviously, but you're obviously, all the viewers are invited back, no charge. And we'll keep digging on this, because I think I can see 3 or 4 summits on these topics.
I've only got panels left, so you can just jump ahead
and
on that one.
We've also got your little
same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So also same question. What is the panel supposed to do? That's the first thing we need to see. It has to compress and adapt to the horse's shape, any asymmetry, and also keeping the pressures from the tree, away from the horse. It's an impact control from rider and horse's movement and between them to get the right, what should we call it? Rhythm between them. And it also should then provide stability. And it needs to, be fitted to the type of horse rider body that we're dealing with. And this means we have then a lot of materials out in the market. Some of them may not be thought through that well, and others have been, like Bradley said, tested quite well. So just throw the next one up, and then it's just one thing. I don't know if you can share the last picture with people after this, because it basically asks everyone, where they think they would fit. So go back to the other one on panel. So I divided them into 4 categories right now. So it's minimal stability. Those are the ones that basically squish. You can put your fingers through them. And they just, there is no stopping them. Limited stability, you can normally, press into and quite far. So, you can go like more than half an inch into them. I think Bradley will have a good input on this one. And then you have like the medium stability, where you can actually, it's like your flesh or like a muscle. You can make a dent in it, but it won't go down more than, less than 1/4 of an inch, but you will feel it has a slight give. And then that is, of course, more stable. And then you have, like the old Western type felt panels and the Western type panels where you actually have wood and then a big slab of felt. So they really, there is no softness at all. And they really have very, very good stability. But of course, then they have to fit really, really well because they're not going to give that much. So you may have other layer of felt under them. So these are like the 4 types that I wanted to mention just as a ballpark. And that is really so that we have like the last leg of looking at, okay, what was the horse stability? What was the rider stability? What about the tree? And what about the panel? Because it just gives us the whole spectra of what we need to start thinking about. Now, Bradley, it's all yours.
Right, I'm now going to confuse everybody, in terms of those panels. So Marie is absolutely right. You've got the minimal stability all the way through to high stability. Now, the interesting part is that you could have all 4 categories in one panel.
Agree.
You sit there and kind of go, don't just think of a panel as just one singular component. You could literally have an entire panel which has all 4 categories in the panel in multiple different places, because we've got to think about this as a 3-dimensional object. So you don't actually think of it as one just singular thing. And the beauty about it is that a panel can be added to create greater stability for a already flexible tree. So sometimes you can have a highly flexible tree and then you can put in a rigid panel.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden you've now gone, great, right, you've just completely confused the situation, where previously another fitter or another customer or another product might be a more rigid tree and a much softer panel. And that's the beauty about it, is you're sat there kind of going, we as an industry, we typically kind of think of a panel or a seat or anything like that as a one singular linear product, and you're sat there going, no, it's 3-dimensional. You have to think in 3 different dimensions, from top to bottom, from left to right, from front to back. And that's the frustrating and fascinating thing, is this kind of weird thing we have within the industry where, we quite happily accept what we're told. And you sit there and go, well, no, break the rules. Just, God damn it, think outside.
I have to ask you, Bradley. I mean, apart from doing 3 different layers, which makes all sense of the world, have you also made 3 different densities in the 4 sections along the panel yet?
Right. So I can't tell you what we're doing because it is currently going through IP processing and patent processing. But like the thing I can say is what we're doing is pretty much breaking every rule possible, and we are really, the most polite way of describing it is we are fully embracing the concept of hybridization, wholly and utterly. There is no material held back. You'll see in the slides what I've got, where we break down the back into kind of various segments and sections, and they're all under different loading forces. So logically, if you've got a spine like the shoulders, for example, let's talk about the front end. You sit there and go, right, you've got the shoulders moving forward and backwards. You don't generally, especially in our design, that's why we've designed it our way. You don't have the vertical load. In a traditional tree, you do, because you have the gully bar, you have the stirrup bars, you have all of that type of stuff. But in our design, you don't have that because of various design features which we've done to mitigate it. So all of a sudden, what we have to worry about, the forces which we have to worry about, are much more kind of horizontal. They're forward-backward loading rather than vertical loading. So all of a sudden, the materials which we utilize at the front of our panel is completely different to the materials which we utilize in the middle or the back. And then you look at it from, you know, left to right, and you look at it from top to bottom, and you suddenly sit there and kind of go, this is not kind of as simple as a singular material in without the whole entire thing. You sit there and go, this is a specialist approach in terms of, but it can all be calculated, and that's the beauty about it, you know. And the funny part is that you sit there with in meetings which we have with engineers and everything like that, where all the forces are kind of segmented and kind of pushed around and various things like that. But you make one change, and you're then having to adapt other things for that. You know, for example, in order to help fit our saddle, you know, one of our obsessions, because we're much more focused at the moment in terms of dressage, we're trying to alleviate the shoulder rotation. Well, how do we do that? Well, what we've done is we've pushed the gullet bar further back. So we have features, and how have we then corresponded with that? We then have tweaked our panel with different materials. What we've also then done is we've created a point which then does something very clever and very, you know, it hangs down with like little fingers, and our point is wider. So we have almost 4 micro points, which then articulate and flex with the movement of the shoulder blade. So then saddles shifting forwards is not so much of a big issue from our perspective, because we don't have to worry about shoulder impingement, because we've adapted the product in other ways, shapes or forms. So what we're doing is something completely different. But it is then looking at panels and going, right, how do you create that stability? And where do you want to create that stability? You know, the funny thing which we all talk about in saddle design is we're obsessed with spines. And I've sat down, and one of my engineers turned around to me and said, right, we're all obsessed with spines and spinal movement. Where does the saddle actually touch the spine? And I was like, it doesn't at all. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are so obsessed with spinal movement and spinal elevation that actually the panel actually touches the ribs and the rib structure and the intercostals and all of that, the paraspinals. It is not directly pressing on the spine. It's a secondary influencer. So all of a sudden you sit there and go, right, well, let's just sit down and do the calculations of being a secondary influencer rather than a direct influencer. All of a sudden that changes the panel stability, the materials which you utilize, where you position all of the panels, all the forces, which again blows your mind when you start looking at comparison of flexible trees to rigid trees and how that all works. So
do you come back to when you look at ancient stuff and from different parts of the world, and you go, oh, that wasn't such a bad idea. They didn't have any technology, but that was a good idea.
The thing is when you kind of see, like I've and this is again, it goes back to the industry. Why isn't the industry creating a history of saddles? Why? You know, I've had to sit down and create my own history, my own timeline of saddles, which I've shared with Caroline and on a kind of presentations, where you sit there and go, actually, the European style saddle is only been present for a very short period of time, and it's a perversion of kind of other saddles.
Yeah, it's kind of a bad idea.
Oh, absolutely.
Toxic.
And you go, the ancient tribes, the old way of doing stuff, there was a method behind it, which was, you know, it was about survival. You needed the horse to survive. So therefore, you weren't going to put anything on it, which was going to create problems. So when you start looking at ancient saddles, you know, Japanese kind of archery saddles, you know, the military kind of European saddles, even you know, the English medieval saddles, all of those types of things. You start looking at the rider position, you start looking at where they positioned the rider, you start looking at the panel length, you start
how
looking
they
at all
separated the forces, which I understand you have done too now, because they were always separating forces.
Yeah. And this is the thing, is you're sat there going, right, like, one of the hilarious parts is when you look at an ancient, and I've been very lucky to go and actually touch an ancient medieval saddle. I was very, very privileged. But you start feeling how the panels were sculpted, and they were, you know, they're bowed like skis. and they were sanded down, and there's so much craftsmanship and history which is built into it. It makes your skin tingle. But the real hilarious part is when you picture that and you pick it up and you put it onto a horse, and you try and put it in a typical European or English style position, it doesn't work. You have to sit there and go, right, that doesn't work. Right, okay, so you go to the expert and go, okay, where do I put it on this horse? And they pick it up and they go, right there. And you're like, hang on, so the panel is going over the oh my God, right, okay. And all of it completely blows your mind when you start understanding that our weird obsession with, and I talk about this in my presentation, which is why I was kind of like, I really want to be controversial, but we will be later. But and go, this obsession which we have about moving a tree 2 inches further back off the shoulder. In most polite way of describing it, it's because of poor saddle design. It's not actually. We do that as a bodge, and that's where, and I'm just teasing a little bit in terms of my language, which I was going to use, because it is a bit of a bodge. We have, as fitters, we have pushed the tree further back to allow for the benefit of the horse, but the problem is that saddle design has not evolved. And I will quite happily have a go at saddle fitters and manufacturers in both equal parts, because there's a lack of communication going on, as we've talked earlier, and that's why you can start to understand the desire for treeless saddles and treed saddles, and why there's this kind of polarizing categories going on. You can understand the desire for a treeless saddle so that it doesn't impinge the shoulder, but again, that follows quite stereotypical historical fitting processing, this kind of weird obsession that we have to push the saddle. I've seen treeless saddles being fitted 2 inches behind the shoulder, and you're sat there going, why? There's nothing there. Like, whack it forward. You can do it. It's all completely bendy and flexible. Don't worry about it. But the fitter has been conditioned to fit 2 inches behind the shoulder, and you sat there going, it's treeless. It does. There's no tree. It's completely bendy. And you sit there and go, right, well, saddle design, saddle creation has not evolved. I can sit down right now and look at a tree and go, right, I can give you 3 innovations straight off the bat, which will immediately change the industry from top to bottom. And is it going to happen? No, of course not. Because manufacturers have their methodology, they have their products, they're only going to do that. Trying to do something which is totally different. And the innovations which I have are not, they're just adapting what we call adapting a rigid tree structure into a more functional format. It's not difficult, but it's frustrating, in the most polite way of putting it, because you can see, it's just a fascinating. It really is fascinating from the history of where we've come from to what we are now, and saddles have shrunk. They have remarkably got smaller, and we really don't understand. We don't understand. That's a terribly rude thing to say. What I mean to say is we have lost our path, in my view, in terms of saddle design, saddle manufacturing, and saddle fitting. And I don't mean that in a particularly rude way, but what I mean by that is we have sacrificed a lot of things as fitters. We have sacrificed a lot of products. We have sacrificed a lot of the fitting process to make it work. When we should have turned around and said, that is not good enough, make it better. What we've done is taken a product and gone, okay, we will try and make it work. As I said earlier, we are trying to bodge it, when actually we should be much more kind of demanding in terms of the manufacturers and go, no, actually design something and make it better. Don't just make
there are people who've done that, who turn around and say, okay, I'm going to make a saddle, and yet they've had to go to these manufacturers that have certain trees.
Yep.
And then they have been unable to get a tree with a better shape.
Yep.
Or panels with a better function. because there is no way they can make any manufacturer invest in doing. I was speaking to a lady just the other week, and she would basically had to spend hundreds of thousands just to get a couple of trees and a couple of samples made.
Yeah.
And she realized that no, she wasn't able to do that.
Yeah.
This is so exciting. This is so exciting. I'm just so overwhelmed. Just coming back to what the audience or members of the audience were saying earlier, is that this compounding and losing our way with saddles, is that down to the horse breeding and the type of horse we have now? And I got a couple of really good comments here and statements. Questions. Is there a sort of formula you have for fitting stable saddles for less stable horses, or vice versa? Or is it highly individual? Or I'll say this, do we have to train the horse first to make sure they're fit to be ridden? Very quickly, Maria, because this was something you were talking about, the stability.
I think if you flip the next picture, it will kind of answer itself a little bit. So what the formula is, that the fitter needs to be aware of that there is a rider component.
Yeah.
If the rider is very unfit, very tall, very unstable, if that happens to me, I basically say you need another type of saddle, with the side, like a Western or ancient, or, what Bradley and I was talking about, something that comes down on the sides of the horses and has more stability. That might be what I would say. If the rider is decently fit or willing to do some training, I would say, okay, you can go in a better plastic tree or a lighter wooden tree, and with panels that we then find, that your horse is accepting, depending on where it is. If you're a child and you are light and you have a pony, you can have a super flexible plastic tree and a super soft whatever panel a lot of the time, because you are not creating big forces. It's so that's one end of the spectrum. If you have a riding school, or like here, we have a lot of people riding Icelandic horses. They come once a week and they go on a trail ride. And I used to have a customer who had treeless saddles, and all their Icelandic horses were kind of straight and very hard in the back, because the riders are heavier and quite unstable. Once they shifted to our saddles that are not super stable, but the horses started to change, but our saddle is not maybe suitable for the largest riders, the most unstable. So you have to kind of look at, what happens with the horse, what happens with you. And then, fitters, when they start to think about it this way, and they have worked with some different brands and seen different brands, they will start to review what they see in a different way, and their knowledge will grow. Because it's a discussion. What is the horse situation? What is your situation? Okay, we have to try this. And like Bradley says, sometimes you have to rent a saddle for a month or two to see where does it take us.
And another super question here, super controversial, I think, is here's another summit coming. From Laura, our job as saddle fitters is to make suggestions. The horse and riders make the ultimate decisions, regardless of the saddle brand. So yeah, I do agree that there should be more rider accountability, and that the saddle fitter is not necessarily responsible for the way the rider rides, or not so much responsible for the way the horse is presented to them, beyond ruling out
but in your country, the thing is, it's very hard for the fitter to step away from that, because the riders are a lot of the time not aware of their responsibility. Some of them can't handle it. So that means when they get a problem,
Yeah.
it will come back to the fitters. And I'm hearing a lot about lawsuits and fitters in UK.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that educating the fitters and the riders is absolute key.
Yeah.
Because the riders cannot make these decisions today because they don't even know how to feel under the saddle. They don't know where the pressure should be or shouldn't be. They have no awareness of where their horse is. I had a letter from someone who had rehabbed a kissing spines horse for 3 years, and then the saddle they has bought and put on a few months later didn't work. And to me, that was like, there's a lot more going on here than just the saddle.
Yeah.
So fitters will very easily fall into the idea of selling someone a saddle, thinking that they're going to help them. But with all the other things going on, if they're not aware of them, they will have much bigger problem at the other end. So we need to, as fitters, to quite often pull away from situations and say, no, we can't help you right now, because it would not. And I think we need guidelines for this. What we're doing right now is a project where we are measuring the width of horses.
Yeah.
So we are measuring the width of the withers and the base of the withers. And I also found that we can measure the angles of the withers and the angles of the back. And we are finding that the ratios between these measures can tell you straight away if the horse is quite healthy or not. They can also tell you if the horse is deep in the back, and then it may risk kissing spines. It's definitely not carrying its back. If we could get guidelines on this, where fitters could actually say, okay, we have these angles here. This horse, I should not fit now because it's against my guidelines. Because then everyone would step away instead of saying, oh, this atrophied horse only fits in really narrow French trees. That horse is never going to put a muscle on, but it's always going to fit in that really narrow type of tree. And, we can't stay at that level. We have to step up and get the guidelines out there.
And just very quickly before Bradley comes in there, I've suggested, is it then the coach's job to get involved? Should they be attending with the saddle fitter? Because we can't expect the fitters to come in with just a snapshot of how the horses move and the rider, how they ride. Should the coach be there as mandatory if they have one? It's a big area of expertise that the coaches can come in with. So should that be a negotiation between, or should the coach mediate between the fitter and the rider?
A coach
and the physio
informed
with the horse.
Yeah, the whole team should be informed, I think, because the whole
on the
team
same
needs to be on
day?
the same page.
So getting them all together on the same day. I mean, that sounds
You can't
like
get them all together on the same day. You can hardly book with a client on the same day as the fitter can.
And the client is not going to want to spend something like £500 or dollars to get them all together for the day. Even I think they would need the day almost, or half a day. So
I work a lot with video, and it actually in some instances I worked with the coach holding the camera and me working with the coach and the coach with the rider, and that works quite good. So
we've got the technology
of developing to see how's the rider getting on, what's happening with the horse.
We can do this. Yes. We can do this now. And then Laura says air panels can actually be set to high stability if necessary. Yeah, that might impact on the horse's back musculature and development, and so but that's a whole other thing. Someone else, this sounds a lot more like craft magic than something that can be put into a box and become a standard, like the discussion on farriery. Yeah, we do need to have that conversation. My feedback for that or response is that not so much craft magic. If we can evaluate and test the horses and riders, then match them to the saddles. So it's not a black art when we have the science, as Bradley is advocating, that as long as we know, for example, the tolerances of the materials we're using, it can be done. But that's the black art that's being kept
Look
away.
at if we could combine this. We take all Bradley's science and put that into a guideline, and then we take all that we have done on the rider and the horse stability, And then we merge these two things into standard.
The
Yes.
thing is that, so for example, where you were talking earlier about, getting coaches in, I actually have a slightly different view in terms of that, because what you're trying, that's fundamentally quite difficult, as what Maria said earlier. It's nigh on impossible to get everybody all together. But what is the role of the saddle fitter? And as what Laura quite openly said, it's not necessarily about accountability. It's about actually getting the customer and the horse are ultimately going to choose the product. Now, what is the role of the fitter in a situation? Let's just run a theoretical situation. The fitter, to a degree, should be the objective individual who is just taking measurements. And this is my stylized view. If you take measurements, all of a sudden you are not putting in an opinion. You are saying, okay, this is a fact. Your horse's wither is this. Your horse's wither width is this. Your circumference is this. Blah 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 blah. That then gives a stake in the ground. All of a sudden, that means that you can give those measurements to the coach, and then the coach can turn around and go, right, okay, well, in 4 months' time, 4 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time, or anything like that, come back and do some more measuring and see what the changes are. So all of a sudden, you've got these objective markers in the sand, which tells you how much horse is varying by. Now, that then should almost be the process of, if I know the ranges of this horse moving, and I know the range in terms of muscular development and fluctuation, if I then know all of that, and that doesn't have to be built up immediately. You've got to kind of understand that this can be done over a period of years, over an entire year, to allow for seasonal change. But at some point over a year or 2 years, you're going to have data, and repetitive data, which then means that you can then build products which are, because you're not just trying to fix the problem now, you're also then trying to fix the problem in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years time. You've got to be thinking for the future, and not only for you, it's for the industry at the end of the day. So all of a sudden, if you can have these measurements, and we all have them in terms of flexi curves, so we all know the fleet seasonal fluctuation. It means that then, as a manufacturer, you can build in tolerances within your product line to cope with this. You can also then build in relationships with the fitter to go in preemptively to make changes, so then the horse doesn't get those issues. You can look at all of this, and it's the role, in my view, it's the role of the fitter to be more objective, and their role is almost like the person who comes in and objectively measures, and is almost kind of going, well, okay, how much actual training have you been doing? Because let's be realistic, most people kind of go, I've been doing loads, and actually you look at it and go, well, actually no, you had COVID, you had some time off, you went on holiday, you did this, that, and the other. Oh, I've been riding loads. You haven't, because your horse is muscular, or you may have been riding loads, but you've been riding inappropriately and the horse is hollowed, or for whatever reason. But you as a fitter almost come in as an objective measurer to quantify, and that then feeds into the coach, that feeds into the customer, that feeds into, and what happens is everybody works homogeneously together, but they don't all have to be at the same place, because when, like, as we all know, if you get a customer, a horse, a saddle fitter, and a coach all in the room at the same time, they're all going to have vastly different opinions. They're all going to have vastly different expectations. And you sat there and go, it's just going to be too many cooks, and you're not actually going to get anything done. Whereas if a fitter just goes in quietly and goes, right, here's all the measurements, here's all the here's everything, there you go, to the coach can look at it. It's getting people to work and respect each other, but also respect each other at a distance, not necessarily all in the room, because it becomes very intense. It's quite exhausting at the end of it.
What we need there is some tools so that the information can be shared effectively. And I think what we have developed in the VBR courses and in the horse one that I've done is a way for the trainer and the owner and the rider to assess the horse's top line and posture, so that they know where they are because a lot of the time when we come out, it's a surprise to them to find out where they are. And if they know where they are, if you, like you say, if we're doing this assessment, basically taking the posture and the notes of certain details is going to tell you exactly where that horse is from a self-carriage point of view, how well the back is doing, how it's been training, because the posture guide actually gives you that information. And that should also become something where we have a guideline on, so that you just, like you say, Bradley, we just feed that in. This is where you are. You below the limit or you're above it. Just go fly with it.
And the thing is that if you have something which is much more objective, suddenly you're removing, in the most polite way possible, you're removing the interpretation that the fitter is saying, "Oh, you're a bad rider." You're removing that. You're turning around and going, "No, this is a guideline. This is outside of me coming in as a fitter. This is me coming in to try and support you. But this is where you're at." And what it means is that if you're at that level, then I can only work at that level. It's like me going in as an osteopath and assessing a horse. Like I went and saw a horse today, and you sit there and go, "He's a beautiful horse." But I'm not going to go in and assess him at Grand Prix level, because he's not a Grand Prix horse. He's a horse which is only doing novice and pre-novice. So my assessment level has to be in expectation of the performance level. It's the same thing with saddlery and saddle fitting. Now, at the moment, we have that process, but it's all individualized, and that's the problem with being a therapist. That's the problem. You're desperately always working in the subjective realm when actually you need to work in the objective realm. But you shouldn't. That is more acceptable in terms of therapy and being a hands-on therapist. It's not so acceptable when you're dealing with product and actual nuts and bolts and material and all of that type of stuff. That needs objectivity, because then you are protecting your fitters, you're protecting your customers, you're protecting the industry, and that is the triad which you need to try and basically protect, because we have a huge amount of social license. And I look at this and I'm like, there is a potential tsunami coming for the industry if we haven't got, we all know what's happened in terms of the social media with a certain stud and various things like that. We have a lot of social license in terms of that, and we are relatively protected. But that glass door could break at any point, and all of a sudden I'm desperate so that as an industry, as a saddle fitting industry, we at least can turn around and go, yeah, no, we're self-regulated. No. We are self-regulated. We are doing the best things, even if it's at the beginning, even if we're literally doing those tentative steps, we need to have that. Otherwise, we are going to get kind of legislation thrown on us, and we are not going to have any way of mitigating it and everything like that. So I'm desperate to try and build a little protective bubble around the industry, which I care about and I can see, which we just need, because ultimately I can see it's going to protect everybody at the end of the day.
And we need to protect fitters from ambulance chasers who will basically start with saying, there's mis-selling here. Did you buy a saddle in 2024? And so, and also in terms of social license, you may have made a brilliant design and everything's perfect for that horse, and then it'll be, but here's your saddle, but you can't ride. Which would be a terrible shame. A couple more comments here, because we do need to wrap this up. Unfortunately, I don't know who Crickets is, but with reference to your magic and craft, maybe it's just the way Bradley presents it then. And that's a tongue-in-cheek comment with a smiley face. But you're right. If it can all be measured, a standard can be created, but still it's very much an art. But I would say that intuition art comes from education. Sometimes we do things, we don't know where it comes from, but it does come from education.
And also it is very much an art at the moment. It is very much an art. You've got to, the amount of knowledge which you have to have as a saddle fitter.
Yeah.
On every product, on every tree, on every material, on where the stirrup bars are positioned. Oh, what type of material are they using as padding? Okay, what type of leather are they using?
Yeah.
What type of, it suddenly
it's an impossible job. It's really
it's a completely impossible job. So it is an art at the moment, because you have to learn all of this, and you have to source it out, and you have to find it and figure it out and puzzle solve, because it's not presented in an appropriate way from a leading organization. I wholly believe that it will become more scientific and more logical, and that will then improve innovation, because all of a sudden we're all trying to hit the same standard, and it suddenly pushes it. It's what we found in Formula One was when you started to create more rules, people started to think outside of the box more, because when you have an industry with no rules, everything's game, you get this weird kind of sheep following kind of idea. They all follow one idea. It takes a hell of a lot of force to suddenly deviate off and look at things in a completely different way, because you have to break every rule. But when you start creating standards and you start saying, well, no, that's too much force, that's too little force, blah, 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 all of a sudden you get people being really, really clever. And I mean fantastically clever, trying to eke out and because it's human desire to break rules. It's human desire to get ahead and to think. So if I give you rules and kind of stipulations or guidelines, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I wonder if I can just improve that, or I can tweak this, and all of a sudden you've created a product which is outperforming everybody else by 16,000%, and you're sat there kind of quite smug. You see it in Formula One. You see it with Brawn. He did it with how the Formula One engine kind of worked and various things like that. This is how evolution works with humans, and that's where it's great fun.
And also, I mean, people who have a great mind and who play with things, they should be able to have somewhere to come and suggest and to do their things. And like you say, in sports, we have a skier, downhill skier called Ingmar Stenmark. He was famous, like the best in the 70s and beginning of the 80s. And one of the things he was having problems with is that he had very skinny legs. So when when they made his boots, they couldn't make them quite tight enough for him to get the support he wanted in the angle that he wanted to get the force on the ski when he was taking the turn. So he put in little small shims into his boots just to get that support that he needed to be able to, push the way he needed. And that's exactly what we are dealing with here. We're dealing with forces, and to have support right in the right place without creating an extra force where the horse doesn't need it. So it's quite delicate. And I think, if we just look at today, we talk about forces. We talk about, things we can measure. So there's every reason for us to go forward.
Great. Just rushing through some questions again before we finish. Laura says about placement of saddle, depending upon the discipline and design, that she so agrees with you. This is a fascinating discussion, yes. And Laura says, I'm not talking about accountability. I think that's in response to my comment about the riders being accountable. I'm talking about listening to the horse and rider. And yeah, that's it. If the horse and rider are fit for purpose, we'd have far less problems with the saddle, is what I advocate. But I would say that the rider is accountable for the way they load their horse. Yeah, we need more tools to measure that, but they are directly accountable for the loading.
Yeah, but they will probably be quite successful at blaming the saddle.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, because we don't have any guidelines where we can stipulate and say this rider is actually putting this force over here, or this force over here, or this force is like this. Yeah. We have to have a guideline where either you step back or you go forward, and you have given advice, and they need to be followed. Yeah. Like just like Radley said, if you start shimming a little bit, and you've done that to the situation, it's like, who should the rider call if they realized that when they put the saddle on today, it didn't feel the same, it didn't look the same, the horse didn't react the same? Should they keep riding, or who should they call to say, this doesn't seem right anymore?
Yeah.
Should I keep riding, or should I call someone? This needs to be stipulated,
Yeah.
how we respond to their call, what kind of information they can give us, and how quickly we can help them to actually make an adjustment that would be appropriate. Because we don't know what happened if the horse stumbled, if it had loads more food or no food at all, if it had a colic, if it's been out to a competition and gone really hard and lost a lot of weight. It had another rider on for a couple of days that was sitting one way. We have no idea what happened. And so there needs to be an accountability that we need to stipulate a little bit how that should happen, I think.
Definitely. We're getting somewhere now. Crickets, agree with you, Laura. At the end of the day, horse and rider are who the saddle should fit. And Laura, as long as the coach trainer isn't aligned with a particular brand or the fitter for that matter, but yes, teamwork. And crickets, everyone should be informed and involved in the same capacity. As a body worker, I often feel guilty when I have to say, sorry, this saddle quite obviously is too long, even though it was fitted yesterday. But we do have to speak for the horse, however uncomfortable that might be. And crickets again, this also needs to happen for body workers, as we spoke about with Lindsay. And sorry, Lindsay. I'm sorry, I'm going to say your name wrong now. Ansi Polan. Yeah, I know what you're referring to now. And yeah, so we've got a lot more talking to do. One more final sentence from you, Bradley, until the next time. Just one.
I'm just upset that I can't be controversial.
You have been. We've had Laura.
Can't you just show us one controversial thing and let us go away with that?
Go for it.
No, not really, because
fun fight.
Because it's basically it's talking about saddle design and the way we fit saddles. And as I said, I've lightly touched on it in terms of this weird obsession with trying to push the saddle back and how that biomechanically changes the whole element of where the saddle fits and the consequent ramifications from that. And it's fascinating when you actually sit there with some diagrams and you just suddenly kind of go, crap, right? It's good fun, but as I said, it's going to be quite controversial. And as you know, I'm upset that we can't be controversial and actually turn around and have a go at the industry.
Are you saying what I'm saying? If the saddle opens up and has a certain design, it can go, be by the shoulder and over the shoulder, because the shoulder should actually, it closes, it goes towards the rib cage. It has to do that. You don't put the weight there. You put the weight underneath the stirrup bar anyway.
Aha.
That's where the rider is. I mean, I don't know why people are so obsessed with the absolute front of the saddle. If you have some,
I know exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Can I quickly just show something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Caroline, go on then.
Yeah.
Allow me to. There is it. True. There you go. Can you see that?
Throw what Caroline has in the
hang on, let me add it in. I'm adding it in. Yeah.
Right. Let me just show that. Throw that up. Right. Here's a saddle cut in half, everybody.
Yeah.
You can see the pink zone. If you look at a saddle and you split it into thirds, you got your front third, your middle third, and your back third. Your middle third, the pink zone, is exactly where you would typically sit.
Yeah,
okay?
I do this too.
So that's where a typical rider would sit. Now, as you can see, what I've done is I've cut a saddle in half, lengthways. I've then whacked it on a horse, and I apologise, it's kind of slipped off, and that's purely because of the weight, but it gives you a rough idea. You can see where the front of the shoulder is on the left. Okay, so all of a sudden you can see where the girth straps are. Okay, So if you've pushed the tree further back, then all of a sudden you have to have point straps. Do you understand? So all of a sudden you're sat there going, well, the girthing system, if you want the tree further back, the girthing system has to go further forward. And you've got this dichotomy, because you've got this group of individuals which is kind of going, right, push the tree further back to allow for shoulder rotation. And then you go, well, you can't have point straps because that then compresses the saddle at the front. And you're sat there going, well, if you push the saddle back and then you put the girth straps further back, then the saddle's going to slip forward.
Have you seen the Icelandic horses? Have you? I mean, are they're a typical example of, they push the saddle back until it tilts forward.
Yeah.
And now they're sitting at the front of it, which they like. It's just so ridiculous.
all of a sudden, you're sat there going, hang on, right, so you've got this argument going on between the designers of saddles and the fitters. And as I said before, it's a bodge job. There's a bodge going on. Fitters have had to bodge saddle designers or saddle designs. They've had to bodge it to make it work. And I would argue, and this is controversial, I would argue that the saddle fitters, you've had 30 years of telling people to push a saddle 2 inches off the shoulder, 2 inches off the shoulder. That started in the 90s, where we're always kept telling everybody, bring the shoulder, allow the shoulder rotation, push the saddle further back. And what does a customer generally do? Okay, well, a customer will generally pick up the product and just whack it on the back, and they will then just let it sit into that groove behind the shoulder. So customers are lazy, and I don't mean that in a rude or negative context, but for a variety of reasons. People are picking up, they're going horse riding for a reason. They're going horse riding to get away from partner, to get away from work, to actually connect with somebody.
It's their own time. Yeah.
So this is their time. So they don't want to necessarily pick up a product and just go, oh, right, no, it's got to be 2 inches further back and everything. People are inherently lazy. They will just put a product on. So all of a sudden, you sit there and go, well, hang on, you've had 30 years as a saddle fitting community telling people to shunt the saddle further back, but yet nobody's really listening, and everyone's just putting the saddle on all of it where they naturally perceive it to be. So you've got a fundamental failure of saddle design, and you've got a fundamental failure of saddle fitting, to a greater or lesser degree. So you sit there and go, the two are not communicating, and that's where there's a failure within the industry.
That's why I've been successful. Now you both, because I sold this in my trees and my saddles, so I don't have this problem. And I guess that's why fitters are like, oh, I could just plunk the saddle on and the horse looks.
But you sit there and go, there's a fundamental failure within the industry that it is not communicating with each other. You've got two groups within the community which are not communicating. There's nothing going on, and you sit there and go, this is diabolical.
Well,
I measured every angle of 7 trees when I started, because I knew exactly what type of horse each one of them fitted, and because I had worked with Peter Monet, he is quite good when it comes to trees. And then I measured them all to say, okay, why does this fit this type of horse? Why does this work? Why doesn't it work for the rider? And once I figured it out, it was like, okay, this is not so hard.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to be continued on this one. 2 more comments. Laura says, I'm waiting for Bradley to be controversial.
Yes.
Aren't we all? And you, Maria. And also from Laura, terrible photo, saddle on loins, old-fashioned girthing. So that's a fair comment. Maybe you could put that saddle back on again.
Well, the irony is that saddle is a 17-inch saddle. And this is where we start talking about how saddles are measured, because you sit there and go, there's 3 measuring systems, which are all absolute kind
ridiculous.
It's all you sit there and go, okay, right, this is a 17-inch saddle. Okay, where? Are you talking about from head nail to the central cantle? Are you talking the actual side length, or are you talking about the panel length? Like which one? Pick. I haven't got a clue. You're sat there, but that is a 17-inch tree. You know, however which way you want to measure that, you know, and that is supposedly a 17-inch tree, which is done in length. That is positioned on that image on that left-hand side, is positioned on 2 inches off the shoulder. So that's not positioned where, and so it will go forward.
No, this is a flawed tree design. I mean, that's why it sits like that.
And that's why I'm saying is you're fundamentally dealing, and there's other images which I go through, which shows you the central point of a saddle and where is the central point or the lowest point of the horse's back. You sit there and go, if you're pushing a tree 2 inches further back, then you're pushing the central point of the saddle of the tree 2 inches further back. So all of a sudden the rider is now behind the apex of the movement.
And probably they seek stability. They don't know they do, but perhaps they're seeking stability when they come and put it further forward on the horse. So it's confusing.
So all of a sudden,
they will also seek stability because it has such a long waist on it. The widest part of the seat is so far back. And some riders are going to be pushing until their seat bones actually find something to sit on.
But Laura's not backing down on this one. She said positioned wrongly. So
she can absolutely kind of have a go, and that's no problems, because there are many more photographs, and she can understand exactly what I'm talking about. Because
she can bring her own photo next time.
That's a 17-inch tree with a 16-inch panel.
Yeah, and fitted behind the
and fitted 2 inches behind the shoulder. So you sit there and go, okay, like I didn't design that, so it doesn't bother me. That's just a tree which I basically ripped up and to use for educational processing. But this is what I mean is you've suddenly got a 17-inch tree with a 16-inch panel,
and still not doing the horse any favors, really.
No, because what none of them are doing, they're not looking at where's the middle, where do we want to put the rider. And then you have to go, how much distance do I have in front of me? And and what's the distance I need behind me? If you design like that, you would figure out, where to put the seat, how to angle the rails. You will figure out how long distance you want between certain things. But the tree makers are not doing that. And yes, the back got shorter.
Aha, now we're getting into the nitty gritty, but it's time to go.
Time to go.
Sorry. Okay, I'm sure you're going to get a million thank yous. We just lost one viewer. Throughout that, we hadn't lost any viewers.
But you said it was time to go. So.
Yes. So thank you so much for Maria and Bradley for being so generous. And if you could be massively generous again and come back, we have to have this polite bum fight about your slides.
That's fine.
So we'll get together behind the scenes and we'll fix a date sooner rather than later. But thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. And it's been fantastic. Some great discussion, folks. Big thank you from Laura and Dorothy. Thank you. So thank you so much for lovely listening to all. Looking forward to the next one. Massive thank you. Brilliant discussion. So we'll come back and I'll send you the replay and your links and things, and also that video which we didn't get to see from Maria. So I will give you no, I'm not going to give you two a chance to say good night, because you're just going to keep talking, aren't you? So we'll come back and another time. And I think we all need to say to you, love you, Maria and Bradley, from everyone. And see you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.